Now I'd like to share the scripture for my sermon today is Luke 21, 1 through 4. And I have preached here before, and honestly, I can't get off of the topic of mercy. I can't. Mercy to me is as important as prayer. It's as important as other things that Christians hold dear. And so I'd like to spend some time this morning talking about merciful living. Luke 21, 1 through 4. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. How is that possible? How is it possible that her gift of 2 small coins was more than anything anybody else gave that day as they were worshiping in the temple? Math was not my strong suit in college. But I know that that's not possible. And yet it happened. And it happened in a way that was more important than the amount. I didn't share with you how much Jack Green's scholarship has gotten to. I didn't share with you how much Camp Bays Mountain received, or Wheeler United Methodist received from Jim Meese's generosity. Because as we see in the scripture here, and I believe in the spirit in which God calls us to be stewards, and the spirit in which God calls us to be a cheerful giver, it's not the amount, really. It's the heart. It's the heart in which we do give. Now, obviously, the amount helps, but when we think in terms of our spiritual development, God looks at our heart, which is so important. I want to share with you a definition of mercy. Mercy is God's supply system meeting every need everywhere. Now think about that. God's supply system meeting every need everywhere. We live in a world of supply systems, don't we? We live in a world where we have needs and somebody is doing something to meet that need, and we purchase it or we use it, and our need is met. I go to Uganda about once or twice a year, formerly South Sudan, and then our efforts had to move into Uganda because of the war there. And water. Water is so important in those regions like that. And as I'm there and we're consuming so much bottled water, believe me, I'm more mindful of the supply system of bottled water in Uganda, where I'll be in a month, than I am here at a restaurant, because of the great need that those people have for the clean water that Holston Conference provides, that other organizations provide, that the government provides. So it's a acute awareness of that supply system in the simple form of water. And yet there are things that we're not aware of. That is God's mercy on our lives. Is there not? Because He is a merciful God. Now, mercy is not exactly the same thing, in my opinion, as how we might define help. We cry out for help all the time. Anybody here UT fans? Halftime? You cry out for help. We have a specific answer that we have in mind that might help. When we cry out for mercy, have mercy on me, O God, oftentimes what manifests is not exactly what we might have had in mind. But God in His great wisdom knows what we need, what we really, really need, beyond our own concept of it. You know, the widow had a lot of needs. She was poor. She didn't have a husband. If she was poor, she probably didn't have children to help her. And I imagine she knew her needs every single day. And if she lived in Jerusalem, which I assume she did, and she was a part of the Jewish society, which we know, then she knew that she could go to the temple and be outside of the temple, along with the lame and the blind and the other poor people, and have her hand out. Because it was Jewish custom that as you go to the temple to worship, yes, you bring in your tithe into the storehouse, but you also go and you give alms to the poor as you go in to worship. And so that was where they gathered to receive the alms, to receive God's mercy. But how did that mercy flow to her? It wasn't manna. It was through the worshipers. It was through the Jewish folks that went in, and they handed it to her. So she saw it come from them, did she not? But here's the amazing thing. On that particular day, and now this isn't a parable, this is a real person. On that particular day, she went in, she joined them in the worship. She joined them in the service. And she participated in being merciful. Now see, she stepped out of her norm of receiving, of being a consumer of what God had for her. And for some reason, she stepped into being a producer and a provider, to being merciful to others. And the neat thing is, and the ironic thing is that the very tithes that they were giving, the very offerings that they were providing into the temple, was dedicated to helping the poor, the downtrodden, the widows. Why did she choose to do that? And I have a couple of reasons, or a couple of suspicions on that. First of all, I believe that even though she saw people give it to her, she knew where it came from. That she had enough faith in God, that she had enough faith that as she went out, He would provide for her. I often ask myself, do I have that same faith? Do I have that same faith to trust God? That do I understand and believe that all that I have comes from Him? Therefore, all that I need will come from Him. Do you? I also believe that she wanted to be merciful on that day. She wanted to give back. She wanted to be effective. She wanted to be used by God. There's a few people that I want to meet when I get to heaven and go by her house. Of course, there's Peter. I got a lot of questions for Peter. There's Paul. So I'm named after him. But I'd like to spend some time with the widow. I have two questions for her. First question is, what caused you to do it? Second question is, what did it feel like when sometime later you realized that God himself, incarnate in Jesus Christ, was sitting there observing your act of mercy? Because see, folks, God is observing us. God, just as in the widow's experience, is involved in seeing what we do. Now, I want to challenge you with something. I want to ask you to consider doing two things. And I've done this. First, at some point, maybe this week, maybe this month, but at some point, take out a sheet of paper and write down the times in your life that you saw God at work and God being merciful to you. For me, I was a poor college student. This is just one example. I was a poor college student in college, and I needed rent money. And I had too much pride to go call my parents. I decided to pray. Kind of a novel thing for me. And the exact amount of money that I needed for rent was in an envelope in my post office box on campus. I'm not saying he's an ATM machine, Brandon, but it sure did help. Take time to write down the times and the places that you knew, that you know, that you've experienced God's mercy in your life. It'll bring you to your knees, I tell you. Second thing I would ask you to do is take out another sheet of paper. Spend time in prayer. Ask God where, who, why, that he's calling you to be merciful to others. That he is inviting you to join him. Maybe it's forgiving someone. Maybe it's visiting someone. Standing in prayer for something on the behalf of someone else. Maybe it's just being more loving. Write that down. You know, in the world we live in today, especially with what happened last night, what happened this week with the shootings and the other things that are going on, this world needs more mercy. Do we not? Each one of us can participate in making that happen. And finally, I'll share, the neat thing is, I believe, is that when you get to heaven, there might be someone that comes up to you and says, you were on my first sheet. I knew when you were merciful. What an impact that could be. Thank you.